Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a region that's, well, constantly in the headlines, but maybe not always fully understood, the South Caucasus. We've got a fascinating stack of sources here detailing recent geopolitical shifts, and trust me, it's a story of ambition, shifting allegiances, and the critical importance of, really, a single strip of land, our mission today. To unpack this intricate web of relationships and rivalries that have emerged, especially since the 44-day Karabakh War, we'll be focusing on the rising regional influence of Azerbaijan and Turkey, the changing dynamics with Russia, Armenia's kind of surprising pivot, and the evolving roles of players like the U.S., EU, and even Iran and Pakistan.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here is how all these elements, all these different threads, converge around one single, highly strategic project, the Zangezur Corridor. This isn't just about roads and railways, It's fundamentally about control, influence, and the very future of trade and power projection right across Eurasia. We'll dig into the diplomatic crises it sparked, especially between Azerbaijan and Russia, the competing visions for regional transport, and what this all means for the countries involved, of course, but also for you, our listener, trying to make sense of these, well, pretty complex global shifts.
Okay, let's unpack this then. One of the biggest takeaways from our materials is how that 44-day Second Karabakh War, back in November 2020, just fundamentally altered the whole status quo. Decades of it, gone.
Indeed. It was a decisive victory for Azerbaijan, no question. It allowed them to reclaim significant territory, land that Armenia had occupied since the 1990s. And this didn't just change the map, it profoundly strengthened Azerbaijan's confidence, and empowered Baku to pursue a much more independent, sort of multi-vector foreign policy.
And Turkey played a massive role here, right? Our sources really highlight Ankara becoming the, quote, political guarantor of Baku's victory.
Absolutely. The Shusha the Shusha Declaration, signed by President Erdogan and President Aliyev on June 15, 2021, that solidified their relationship. It became a formal, strategic alliance, even including mutual military assistance. That was a clear message.
A message to who?
To any third parties, really. Anyone seeking to exert influence in the region. It signaled this new, combined strength.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting reading through this material. The sources mention a growing alliance beyond just Turkey and Azerbaijan. What about Pakistan?
Pakistan, yes.
Yeah.
They provided unwavering support to Azerbaijan during the war, very much mirroring Turkey's stance, and like Turkey, playing a critical role in providing advanced military tech, like those CHS, the armed drones. This led to a more institutionalized trilateral cooperation. It started in early 2021, regular foreign minister meetings, parliamentary agreements like the Baku Declaration.
When those military exercises?
Right, the Uzkardesh Three Brothers joint military exercise in Azerbaijan in September 2021. That was a strong signal, a visible sign of their commitment to mutual support on sensitive issues. Things like Karabakh, Kashmir, Eastern Mediterranean, Cyprus. It's a package deal, really.
Okay, so moving from those foundational shifts, let's zoom right in on the Zengezur Corridor. This seems to be the heart of current tensions. What exactly is it, and why is it causing so much friction, especially between Baku and Moscow?
The Zengezur Corridor, it's a proposed transport route. Strategically vital. It's meant to connect mainland Azerbaijan with its Nakhchivan exclave, and crucially, it passes through Armenia's Syunik region, which is also known as Zengezur. Now, the November 9, 2020 ceasefire agreement, the one that ended the war, it didn't explicitly use the word corridor, but Article 9 definitely laid the groundwork for it.
So what's the issue with control? Our sources say Azerbaijan wants a seamless connection, free from customs, border checks, basically Armenian interference.
Exactly. Baku is demanding what they call a sovereign transit route. It's effectively an extraterritorial passage. Armenia, on the other hand, they've countered with their own idea, the Crossroads of Peace concept. They're aiming to get that going by late 2024.
And that involves Armenian control.
Yes, Yerevan wants its own customs control, maybe using automated risk assessment systems. But Azerbaijan finds any Armenian security or customs presence completely unacceptable. They've suggested maybe Russian oversight or perhaps a neutral third party instead. That's the core disagreement.
This struggle, it feels like much more than just two neighbors arguing over a road. The materials strongly suggest this is a deeper geopolitical competition. Control over transport lines, integration into global projects.
Precisely. That's exactly what it is. The corridor's opening, if it happens Azerbaijan's way, would create a direct land link between Turkey and Azerbaijan. This would physically deepen the integration of the so-called Turkic world, boosting economic and political unity. President Erdogan has repeatedly called it, and I think this is telling, a new integration route uniting not just Nakhchivan, but the entire Turkic world.
Wow, so the potential impact is huge.
Immense. Projections suggest it could become a crucial part of the east-west trade route. It could significantly shorten existing paths for cargo coming from Central Asia, China, the Caspian Basin headed to Europe, and potentially it could open up routes for new energy pipelines, fiber optic links. It's about massive economic and strategic leverage.
But Russia, our sources point out they have their own vision for Zengezur. How does Moscow fit in, or want to fit in?
Well, initially, Moscow's preference seemed clear. They wanted the Armenian section of the corridor to be under direct Russian control, maybe supervised by their FSB security service. The goal seemed pretty obvious. Keep influence over the Azerbaijan-Armenia normalization process, and critically, prevent a fully sovereign Turkish-Azerbaijani route from emerging, one that bypassed Russia completely.
But things have shifted.
They have. A new player, or rather a returning player, has entered the picture with a counterproposal. The United States.
Right, the U.S. involvement. We saw this fascinating proposal for an American logistics company to manage the corridor, completely cutting Russia out.
Yes, exactly. This idea, it actually first floated around during the Trump administration, and it resurfaced in 2024, with his potential re-election possibly on the horizon. If that happened, it could seriously weaken Moscow's strategic position in the South Caucasus.
The timing is interesting, too.
Oh, absolutely no coincidence. This resurfacing, right when Azerbaijan-Russia tensions are high, it just underscores that this isn't simply a transport dispute. It's fundamentally a struggle for regional influence, control over critical infrastructure.
Okay, so beyond just Zangezur, our sources paint the South Caucasus as this real nexus for major energy and transport corridors. And this is another front for competition, right?
That's absolutely right. This region is critical. For Europe's energy security, for diversifying Eurasian trade routes, it's pivotal. And Azerbaijan has long been crucial here. Think about the pipelines. BTC oil pipeline, the Baku-Tbilisi-Erzurum gas pipeline, TARAP, all designed to ensure energy exports bypass Russia. That's been a strategic goal for years.
And the Ukraine war just put that on overdrive, didn't it? Europe's interest in Azeri gas.
Dramatically so. Post-2022, the EU explicitly called Azerbaijan a key partner for alternative gas supplies. Remember Ursula von der Leyen's visit to Baku in July 2022?
Yes, the energy memorandum.
Exactly. That committed Azerbaijan to ramp up gas exports to the EU. From about 8 billion cubic meters in 2021 up to 20 billion by 2027. That directly and significantly weakens Moscow's energy leverage over Europe. It's a big deal.
Let's shift to the trade routes then. Our materials talk a lot about two big ones, the Middle Corridor and the North-South Transport Corridor. Why are they so important now?
The Middle Corridor, sometimes called the Trans-Caspian International Transport Route. Its big advantage is it connects China to Europe via Central Asia, the Caspian, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey. Crucially, it bypasses both Russia and Iran. So since the war in Ukraine, its strategic importance has just skyrocketed. You see Central Asian countries now actively looking to diversify their routes, wanting to reduce their reliance on Russia.
And the EU is putting money into this. The U.S. is looking at it too.
Precisely. The EU has included big investments in this route under its Global Gateway program. That's their initiative to build sustainable infrastructure, partly as a counter to China's Belt and Road. Washington also sees the Middle Corridor as useful, a potential way to balance Russian and Chinese dominance and maybe isolate Iran under sanctions. And Turkey's central position here just makes Ankara indispensable to the West in this whole plan.
Okay, but what about Russia and Iran's countermove, the North-South Transport Corridor? How does that play into this?
Right. The North-South Corridor, it's a multimodal route, ships, rail, road. The idea is to connect India through Iran to the Caspian Sea and then up to Russia. It aims to bypass the Suez Canal for trade between India, the Middle East, and Europe. Russia's heavily invested. They provided a 1.3 billion euro loan in 2023 for a key railway link in northern Iran, the Astar-Arash line.
Azerbaijan is involved there too?
It is, as a transit country. So this creates this subtle but very real competition. Which corridor will win out? Which one becomes the dominant trade route? That outcome will shape future economic and political ties in a big way.
This whole discussion really brings up the question, how are all these moves impacting the major players? Let's start with Armenia. Our sources describe a pretty dramatic geopolitical shift for Yerevan.
Yeah, dramatic is the right word. The heavy defeat in Karabakh in 2020 led to, well, profound disillusionment in Yerevan with Russia. Armenia felt Russia hadn't upheld its alliance commitments. Moscow even seemed passive during border clashes in 2022.
So they started looking elsewhere.
Exactly. The Pashinyan government began seeking a permanent peace deal with Azerbaijan, and also, perhaps more out of necessity, a normalization with Turkey. They started direct negotiations in 2022, which led to Prime Minister Pashinyan actually visiting Ankara in 2023. That was a big step.
And this pivot is obviously making Moscow nervous.
Definitely. Russia has historically used the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, kept it simmering, really, to maintain its own influence. So, Armenia turning towards a Western-backed peace process, inviting an EU civilian observer mission to the border in early 2023, Pashinyan refusing to host CSTO drills, the Russian-led security bloc, saying it couldn't protect them.
Clear signals.
Very clear signals of a shift away from Russia's orbit. It fundamentally challenges Moscow's long-held position in the region.
What about Iran? Our sources show a really complex story there, an evolution in their stance.
Yes, Iran's position has been complicated. Initially, during the 2020 war, they supported Armenia, mostly out of wariness towards Turkey and Israel getting more involved with Azerbaijan, and Tehran explicitly opposed the Zangezur Corridor. They feared it would diminish the importance of their own border with Armenia. They also didn't like the idea of Turkey getting a direct land route to Central Asia. They saw that as directly against their national interest.
But then came a significant internal change, the election of President Pezeshkian. How did that shake things up?
Yes. The election of Masoud Pezeshkian, who is himself an Azerbaijani Turk, as president in 2024, that was historic. His initial messages were noticeably more conciliatory towards neighbors, and he seemed supportive of ethnic minority rights within Iran, even mentioning mother tongue education for ethnic Turks in what he called southern Azerbaijan.
That must have resonated.
Hugely symbolic. His visit to Baku in 2025, reading a Turkish poem, greeting southern Azerbaijan. Wow. This shift potentially creates cracks, maybe fissures, in the Iran-Russia axis. Pezeshkian's Iran might adopt a more balanced, maybe multi-vector foreign policy, less automatically aligned with Moscow.
So if we pull back and look at the big picture, Russia really does seem to be losing ground across the board here.
From Moscow's perspective, yes. You've got Turkey's growing influence, Azerbaijan's assertiveness, Pakistan offering nuclear arms support for this alliance, Iran's new, more nuanced leadership. All of it signals a significant weakening of Russia's traditional dominance in the Caucasus.
And the Ukraine war's impact.
Huge. It's diverted Russian resources, military, economic, diplomatic. Western sanctions have isolated Moscow economically, and recent incidents, like the alleged downing of Azeri plane in December 2024, or those killings of Azeri citizens in Yekaterinburg in June 2025. These might be seen as coercive tactics by Moscow, trying to regain leverage, but ironically, they seem to be further damaging Russia's image, its soft power, in Azerbaijan, potentially pushing Baku even further away.
And the West, the U.S. and EU, are they stepping back in more assertively now?
Post-2020, definitely. Both the U.S. and EU began to re-engage more actively. The Biden administration, despite maybe some lingering human rights concerns, clearly sees strategic value in peace and stability there. Secretary Blinken hosted the Armenian and Azerbaijani foreign ministers in 2023 to discuss peace treaty drafts.
A successful peace deal would be a blow to Russian influence.
Absolutely. It would significantly curb it. And the EU, particularly led by Charles Michel, has been very active, bringing Aliyev and Pashinyan to Brussels for talks, supporting Armenia's tilt towards Europe, strengthening those energy ties with Azerbaijan we talked about. The EU really sees the South Caucasus as a major geoeconomic and geopolitical opportunity now.
Okay, let's talk military dynamics. How has all this geopolitical upheaval affected the actual military balance in the region? That's crucial for stability, right?
It shifted dramatically. The Azerbaijani army, hardened by that 2020 victory, equipped with modern Turkish drones. The CAE, as we mentioned, they are now demonstrably the most experienced and modernized force in the region. They're still investing heavily in advanced systems, integrating closely with the Turkish military for training.
Armenia,
on the other hand, devastated by the 2020 defeat. They're really struggling to rebuild their military. They're turning to new suppliers like India and France, partly because they feel they haven't gotten the support they expected from Russia and the CSTO, and Russia's own military presence, the 102nd base in Armenia, their peacekeepers in Karabakh. That's looking increasingly uncertain.
Uncertain how?
Well, you hear Armenian officials hinting they might not renew the base agreements. And Azerbaijan is actively pushing for the peacekeepers to leave if or when a final peace deal is signed.
So the whole deterrence mechanism has shifted.
Completely. It used to be Russia constraining Azerbaijan, mainly through its alliance with Armenia. Now you have Turkey acting as a direct counterbalance, a counterbalance to Armenia, certainly, but in many ways even to Russia itself through its strong backing of Azerbaijan. This new power balance profoundly strengthens Baku's position.
Okay, finally, let's talk about that big, ambitious vision we see mentioned throughout our sources, Turkic world integration. It seems the 44-day war was a real turning point for this idea.
Oh, absolutely critical. Azerbaijan's victory wasn't just about reclaiming territory. It opened up the tangible prospect of Turkic states connecting by land. For the first time, really. The Turkish States Organization, the TDT, it expanded from the old Turkic Council in 2021. It's now a key platform, an institution for economic, cultural integration.
And the Zangezur Corridor fits right into this.
Perfectly. It's seen specifically as a new Silk Road, potentially, quote, the Iron Silk Road of the 21st century, linking not just Azerbaijan and Turkey, but potentially all the Turkic republics in Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and these countries, feeling less reliant on Russia after the Ukraine war, are actively pursuing transport cooperation through these new east-west channels.
And that eco-summit in Kankendi in 2025, that sounded like a really symbolic moment for this integration push.
It absolutely was. Held in former Karabakh territory, the first international diplomatic event there. Think about the message that sends. You had leaders from Turkey, Azerbaijan, Pakistan, Central Asian states, and interestingly, even Iran's new president Pezeshkian attended.
What was the focus?
Very much on trade, green energy, transport networks, signaling this shared vision for the region's future. And President Erdogan's comments there, highlighting solidarity needed in places like Afghanistan and Syria. It showed Turkey's broader geopolitical view. They see the TDT and ECO as vital bridges, connecting the Caucasus, Central Asia, the Middle East, South Asia. It's a grand strategy.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, pulling all these threads together, what does it all mean for the future of the South Caucasus? Our sources seem to point towards two main possibilities.
Broadly, yes. On one hand, if they can actually sign a comprehensive peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and if Armenia can somehow be persuaded to join the Zangezur Corridor project, then you could see quite extensive economic development, cooperation. Armenia could finally integrate into regional projects, normalize relations with Turkey and Azerbaijan, maybe end decades of isolation.
But that likely comes at a cost for Russia.
Almost certainly. It would likely mean Russian exclusion. Their peacekeepers wouldn't really be needed anymore under that scenario.
But if the peace agreement fails, or there's no deal on Zengezur, what's the alternative? Renewed conflict.
That remains the worrying alternative, yes. However, the current trajectory, looking at all the factors we've discussed, the power shift, the economic drivers, the diplomatic efforts, it does seem to lean more towards peace and integration, however fragile. What's undeniable, though, is that the post-44-day war landscape has really empowered regional actors. They're pursuing more independent policies. It's fostered this significant move towards Turkic world integration, drawn the West back into the game, and, crucially, significantly eroded Russia's traditional influence.
It's a quiet competition in some ways, but profound, playing out across transport routes, cultural events, even in cyberspace.
Exactly. And the enduring question for you, the listener, is how this evolving power balance shapes up. You have Azerbaijan and its allies clearly ascendant, Moscow's traditional dominance shaken. How will this ultimately shape not just the South Caucasus, but the broader Eurasian landscape for decades to come? Will it lead to lasting peace and prosperity through cooperation? Or will these deep rivalries, these competing visions, eventually spark new tensions?
That's certainly something to keep watching. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the geopolitics of the South Caucasus.